Thomas P. Broughan, are you sharing, Deputy?
I'm sharing with
Deputy Clare Daly.
Yeah.
Deputy Tommy Broughan.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. I'm delighted for the opportunity to speak on this important topic today. I suppose, Cathaoirleach, I've always believed in the policy of toughen crime, toughen the causes of crime. Indeed, some colleagues and myself, in my former party in Dublin City Council, we developed that kind of policy in the early and mid-1990s, long before the Blairites. But we meant that the resources should be put into, particularly the second part, tough on the causes of crime, as well as being ruthlessly tough on people who carried out crimes. The recent, of course, resurgence of gangland crime and daylight assassinations has brought the whole issue of mob crime and murders firmly back in the spotlight. And we're now, of course, our fourth month into this interregnum, where we don't know, basically, with these acting ministers or would-be ministers or past ministers or whatever, and there doesn't seem to be any direction to the massive fight that's necessary against the appalling events that have happened on our streets. And like a previous speaker, I represented some of our mothers and children who were in the Regency Hotel on that horrendous day, and we've seen a whole litany now of these murders carried out with impunity. And in the past, of course, we've had similar episodes of 5 and 6 assassinations, and traumatic whole communities, like my own parish in Donamead, being traumatised by people coming out and taking the lives of a young man without any trial, without any inquiry into what he might have been involved in or whatever, and then with impunity seeming to be able to walk away and just leave the communities terrorised. Of course, we've now recently had 7 of these murders, and it follows, as I said, the terrifying episodes in the past. In Dublin Bay North, where we've had up to 6 such assassinations over a 6-month period. And I agree with our Archbishop Martin, his call for much tougher legislation, or acting minister, specifically directed at criminal gangs and their leaderships. I mean, earlier attacks on our state, Cathaoirleach, addressed terrorist activity, crime bosses and drug lords, but it clearly didn't go far enough in eliminating this horrendous criminal activity in its entirety. A few years ago, you might remember, Cathaoirleach, I lost my job as a whip of my former party when I opposed Deputy Rabbitt's stupid and ill-timed opposition to the Criminal Justice Bill of 2009, which, as you remember, sought to identify in court and jail directors of criminal activity, and for whatever stupid, inverted commas, liberal reasons Mr. Rabbitt opposed that always escaped me, because on the streets we need it, and we need today, Minister, our outgoing minister, we need ferociously strong action to end this terrorism. And of course, our allegations, Cathaoirleach, that these gangs in Ireland are being directed from abroad. So, Minister, over your last number of years and your predecessor, I mean, why hasn't the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, for example, applied for EU arrest warrants? Why haven't we taken these alleged ringleaders back to this country for trial and for punishment? Like other speakers, like Deputy Coppinger, I have sincere sympathy for those who've suffered greatly from rural crime. And the upsurge in rural crime certainly seems to have partially followed the vicious cutbacks in our Garda Síochána numbers over the austerity years. We learned last year, for example, that the closure of 139 rural Garda stations saved the state just €566,000 per year. And yet it seemed to have a devastating impact on increases in rural crime. And it's also clear, of course, that many gangs in Dublin and other urban centres were travelling to areas where they knew there was a lower Garda presence, and they carried out awful burglaries and indeed terrorised, endangered and traumatised innocent families and innocent people. All communities around Ireland, I believe, Cathaoirleach, need a visible, strongly visible Garda presence, community policing on the ground and constant community patrols in order to combat such targeting of individuals, homes and families. But again, as the previous colleagues have said, Dublin has suffered huge levels levels of antisocial community and drug-fuelled crime for decades, and it's always been extremely difficult to get this rural-dominated Dáil to address those issues. In actual fact, sometimes when we'd be raising in the past issues, for example, like joyriding crime, all kinds of drug-fuelled robberies and so on, it seemed that our rural colleagues, like, it's as if we had two heads. I remember somebody in the newspaper saying, "Don't be wasting the time of the Dáil talking about crime in Dublin." But now that such serious levels of crime have spread out from Dublin, other urban centres, of course, the rural TDs at long last seem to understand our law and order problems. Cathaoirleach, the Harcourt Square Garda station, which is over 1,000 staff, including 600 Gardaí, I believe, Minister, is due to close in May. Yet, as reported earlier this week, the staff haven't been informed where they've been moving to, and of course Cabot station there. So with such uncertainty around such a prominent move, how will this affect on Garda Síochána's ability to investigate criminals and continue their vital work? We've witnessed deplorable cuts in Garda numbers under your government, Minister, in the numbers of Gardaí on the beat, in the resources provided to them to assist them in keeping communities safe, in the closure of Garda stations, and indeed in the restriction of hours of stations which are still open. One of the stations in my own constituency, of course in Howth, it has no nighttime presence, although the town of Howth and the district, of course, welcomes up to maybe 1 million visitors every single year, sometimes up to 40 and 50,000 people on a single day. Yet we don't have a station at night time, Minister. And my former City Council colleague, Councillor Christy Burke, he was just making a point recently about the negative impact of the closure of the station in Fitzgibbon Street. I think that was a vital location. I think Councillor Christy Burke is correct. That it was, again, you just wonder on the logic of that, given the vast territory and also, the presence nearby of Croke Park and so on. And the strength of Garda Síochána went down from 14,547 Gardaí, 478 Garda Reserve and 2,105 civilians at the end of 2009 to less than 12,800. 1,112 Garda Reserve and 2,054 civilians at the end of 2014. And I welcomed, of course, the end of the moratorium and the beginning of the rebuilding of the force. But numbers still are very, very low in so many important districts. In my own constituency, in Dublin Mayo North, for example, it comprises Garda districts J and R of the DMR. At the end of February 2016, there were just 159 and 196 attached to each district, respectively, which includes huge territories in North Dublin, Coolock, Swords and so on. And of course, of the 395 newly attested Gardaí, just 29 have been assigned to the DMR North Division. Overall, Garda Reserve numbers, of course, have more than doubled since 2009, and it's welcome to see that members of the Garda Reserve can now have this recognised, taken into consideration should they apply to be a full-time member of Garda Síochána. And on that matter, I do commend Deputy Minister Fitzgerald, because I'd made representations, I think, like other deputies, on behalf of members of the Garda Reserve, that their service should be taken into account. And I think that was a good measure. Thanks, Can. Constituents, of course, often ask, just a final point, whether Dublin or the Greater Dublin area, Mid-Leinster, should have a totally separate Garda command or in a Garda Síochána, or should it even have a totally separate police force? And of course, when we were commemorating the events of the 1916 period and now up to 2022. Of course, we do note, when you look back into that era, that Dublin did have a separate force, given that the population is heading for 2 million. Wouldn't it be logical to have our own dedicated force in Dublin, largely recruited from within the region, where members of the Gardaí will be familiar with localities, communities and crime hotspots, and indeed living in the areas that they police, which I believe is important. I want to say also to commend the local authorities, in my own case Fingal and Dublin City Council, and Garda Síochána in our districts of the DMR in relation to the joint policing committees. I've been a member of I'm continuing to be a member of the North Central Committee, Cathaoirleach, and I've been a member of the Fingal Committee I was a member for many years. I think, generally speaking, those committees, the Joint Police Committees, do a good job, and it's great to have the opportunity regularly to talk to our key superintendents, chief super, sergeants, and so on. So I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome the new policing authority, which had its inaugural public meeting recently. Of course, the idea of policing authority, it was first developed by colleagues and myself, again in my former party, and later became official party policy under Deputy Howland, and I'm glad to see that it's finally been implemented. It is one thing, amid all the austerity and cuts and so on, that has been positive, I think, from the outgoing government. And just to say then, finally, preventing crime, though, is a crucial aspect of security policy, and there are a number of really positive programmes in that area in my constituency also, such as the Garda Youth Diversion Projects, which have been extended to Dooney-Carney, Fairview, Clontarf and in Kilbarrack, Killester-Raheny. These are very valuable schemes and they've proven their worth, particularly in the parishes of North Coolock in the past. And there are also ongoing small supports for education and clubs around the areas with significant crime rates. But as I think Deputy Boyd Barrett said earlier, this is just a drop in the ocean, and you still find, including in my own constituency, major important clubs and groups. For example, our Edenmore Boxing Club, a great boxing club, which is still looking for a home, still doesn't have a home after all kinds of campaigns and negotiations. And we also have great anti-drug programmes like Kilbarrack Coast, and Kilbarrack Coast still asking for resources, following again the cuts of recent years. Final point I was going to make, of course, Minister, the cuts in the traffic court have been deplorable, and if you look at the statistics on the maths, you'll see that our own Gardaí can't carry out the number of road checks that they would want to. So we've had this ongoing cut after cut after cut in the traffic. Thanks very much. So just to say, as war has been waged in our streets again by ruthless gangs with no respect for human life or decency, I believe the perpetrators must be detected, arrested, taken off our streets, and we need to put the resources in for the social development of our areas. Toughen crime, toughen cause of crime. It's the only way. Thanks.